What's going on? What we got today? We get the Culture War podcast. Something about obesity and health. Probably be talking a lot of RFK, I assume. I'm trying to get through this game too. It's getting kind of it's almost getting tedious.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a big fan of Maha. When the whole Maha thing happened, RFK Jr.'s campaign, everything he was talking about with environmental toxins, that's 10 out of 10, 100%, 11 out of 10. I was like, this is what I'm talking about. This is what we need. So you get a Donald Trump administration, you get RFK Jr., I'm a big fan. You get Tulsi Gabbard. Wow, Elon Musk, man. Talk about the whole package. So obviously, if you guys have followed
What's going on with his wire?
the show, the Tim Has IRL, the things we've talked about with health, I'm always talking about some crazy thing or another, and I'm not even the craziest. You guys ever listen to that Luke Rudkowski guy over at We Are Change? He wears crystals, coffee enemas. I don't even know what's going on with all that. Look, I'm just trying to get better sleep, finding the right diet, exercising, and making sure I'm doing everything I can to be the best version of myself. That being said, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. They're killing chickens. Needless to say, I was mortified when I heard that the Biden administration was killing chickens, because you know how I feel about chickens. They're great. But there's fear of bird flu. We now have this big fear of measles. There's controversy around RFK Jr.'s statements on the MMR vaccine, which I think is largely fake. And questions about why Americans are so morbidly obese, what has caused this, and I certainly have a lot of ideas. So the first thing I'm going to say is, as always, I'm not a doctor, and I recommend you don't get medical advice from podcasts, especially from a guy like me who just reads stuff on the internet and complains about it. Find a doctor you trust, get second opinions if you think you need to, but always take your advice from trusted medical professionals. Literally, that's what I do. And we're gonna have some opinions, thoughts, stories, views from a cultural and political standpoint, and scientific and research and all that stuff. But your health is your health, man. So you got to make sure when you're addressing your health needs, someone tells you, because I can sit here and say things like, I've talked about, I cut the carbs down. I was doing keto for a while. Yeah, diabetics can't do that. So obviously, I'm not trying to talk to every individual specifically. What I am trying to say, me personally, is you guys should seek good advice on how you can improve your health. And we're going to talk about the bigger picture here, what RFK Jr. is bringing, what the administration is bringing. And there's a lot of stuff to talk about.
Still working with
particularly
sound.
Around RFK
seems
RFK
like
Jr.'s views on
seems like the
the
YouTube
MMR
is
vaccine and now
pretty
the
loud
measles
most of the
outbreak.
time when I watch it on my phone.
There's a really funny video showing how the Brady Bunch handled measles versus how Law and Order handles measles. And then, of course, really
That
big
should be a
news,
little
is
bit
fascinating,
better.
is West Virginia has banned artificial dyes. So that could have a major effect nationwide. We're going to go over all of this stuff to the best of our abilities. We got a great panel today. Why don't we start over here with you, good sir?
Hey, I'm Del Bigtree. I was Director of Communications for Robert Kennedy Jr. when he's running for president. I was with him when he was a Democrat. I was with him when he switched to being an independent, and I was there when he was making the decision whether or not to join
shit. I
President
forgot.
Trump.
It's this
We'll
guy.
see how that turned out.
Not going to beat him.
My
Not going to beat
background, I
him.
was a CBS producer on the daytime talk show The Doctors. I won an Emmy Award as a journalist. Celebrating the best that science and medicine has to offer. I got into an investigation into vaccines and made a documentary about it called Vaxxed, which I think a lot of people credit with sort of igniting this medical freedom movement around the world. And I do a weekly talk show online like you, thehighwire.com. So
Right on.
Yep.
Well, thanks for hanging out. We have this fine gentleman here, sir.
I'm Robert Malone. I actually am a physician
All right.
and a scientist.
Oh, you got Malone on there?
Associates
All
in
right.
Maryland.
This will be a good debate.
Let's see, how do I give...
Because I assume the other
comparable
guys of
backgrounder to,
opposite
Del,
outlook.
who I consider a friend for many years now. I guess talking about Bobby, I got to know Bobby pretty well when he called me to ask some questions as he was building this book called The Real Anthony Fauci. And then he asked me to do extensive editing on it twice. I've also written a couple books, The Lies My Government Told Me and The Better Future Coming, and Psy-War, Enforcing the New World Order. The story that kind of catapulted me out into the public space was that for years I'd been working in biodefense and in academia. I actually am a vaccine developer and a vaccine innovator. I was the guy that originally came up with the idea of using foreign labor vaccines. And I guess the shocker was that I also spoke out quite strongly about the bioethics of what was going down with the whole COVID crisis. And in particular started answering a lot of questions about the mRNA technology and raising my own concerns about that tech and what was being observed in the data concerning the safety and effectiveness of that. And that led to just a barrage of attacks from corporate media, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic Monthly, etc., and led me down the path of trying to understand how modern media is working and these topics like psychological warfare and fifth-generation warfare. We write a podcast daily. A Substack daily. And sometimes I do 5 or 6 podcasts a day, but I have one of my own.
Well, right on. Thanks for hanging out. Should be interesting. We have one more gentleman here.
Yeah, tough person to follow there, but my name's Tristan Scott. I'm an electrical engineer by training and could say an expert or talk often online about the electromagnetic aspects of our biology and our environment, things like light, EMFs, and am now head of operations for a tech startup called Daylight Computer. And our whole mission is to build healthier, less stimulating, less addicting technology and get people back into the real world, which we like to say is outside. So it's, over the past 6-7 years kind of transformed my beliefs and understandings about what actually matters from a health perspective. And for me, it really comes back to trying to get back to a natural living in a modern world. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Speaking of light and stuff, I don't necessarily want to start right here, but there was one thing that really fascinated me that I had no idea, and I'm sure all of you did, is you mentioned light and how it affects people in the electromagnetic spectrum and things like that. Obviously, I knew about blue light, melatonin stimulation with, red light. I've got this headset that glows orange before bed. But recently I became a dad, and everybody won't stop hearing about it. That's what happens when people have kids. But they offered up blue light therapy as a precaution for jaundice, babies who are bilirubin building up in the blood. That didn't happen to my child, but they said, it was we can wait and see if the baby becomes jaundice. It's not, the baby's fine. And then we were like, why don't we just do blue light? Is it bad? And I was surprised to see, because it never occurred to me, literally they put a baby under a blue light. That's it. And they put a little blindfold on the baby. And the blue light has an effect on the bilirubin in the blood, which makes it transforms it into a different particle or whatever, I don't know, protein or something, making it easier to remove. And that kind of blue.
They went hard on like the symphony of the song. It's funny.
By the way, where are we going?
To Nibelheim.
The old Nibelheim. Yeah, so go ahead and do that. And then if I can't do any of the VR missions, I can always go back. You see? You see?
How does it feel
Got that cough, F.A.
to be home after all this time? I have no hometown. I wouldn't know.
What about family?
My mother's name is Genova. She died shortly after I was born. My father... Why am I talking about this? Come on, let's go.
Sephiroth's mother's name is Genova?
Something like that. All right.
Blew my mind because I never actually thought about light actually affects the things in your blood. And at hospitals, they literally have blue lights
Yeah, red light
to
therapy.
change things
Are
in
you
your
one of
blood.
those soldier
So people really don't consider how your screens, your TVs, how it's affecting your brain, your blood, your body. And so when we're getting when we're setting up the show, it's like what should we talk about? There's all these things. There's the bird flu, the culling of the chickens, and there's this
Are there a
there's
lot
this
of you?
war on the health of human beings,
First
essentially.
classes?
That I'm not saying literally there's evil people twirling their mustaches being like, how can we, harm as many people as possible? But we've built this world with artificial dyes, preservatives that are toxic and poisonous, and TV screens that blast us with these lights, and we don't realize. And not to mention non-ionizing radiation, and often inadvertently ionizing radiation. And we are living in this world where we're looking at chronic disease, questions around why it's happening, and then we have a population that's not getting enough sleep. They're getting blasted with blue light before sleep. They're eating, their diets are all out of whack. Like, they're eating way too many sugars, way too few proteins, getting no vitamins. So I guess we can just start here somewhere at the beginning. What is, in your guys' opinion, the largest contributor to the chronic health epidemic in the United States?
Free market commerce.
I don't disagree.
I mean, that really is the issue, right? And it's interesting because, I've been a journalist most of my life in looking at medicine and science, but working with Bobby for the first time, I've always had an opinion about politics and decisions that politicians are making. But when you start, really running a candidate, and then as he got closer and closer and finally made this decision to be HHS secretary, you things like I want a free market, right? I scream for free market, but then when you look at like red dye number 3, which was removed, I think 2 days before Biden left office, and Califf, who was the FDA head, they were asking him, what took so long? You knew for 10 years this, can cause cancer. It's an endocrine disruptor. We took it out of cosmetics, but left it in food. And he said, and it was like sort of the discussion we've all been hearing about Fruit Loops. The colors in Fruit Loops there's chemicals that are poisonous. It's illegal in Europe. They have a totally different Fruit Loops box than we have. Why is that here? And he said, because we took the colors out, and the product, Kellogg said the product didn't sell as well, so the bright colors made it sell better. And who are we to get involved with the commerce of a company? It is where you do see this real conflict that we don't think about, right? The beauty of this country is we have this open free market system, and we want, to have capitalism and everything thrive, but you don't think about, is there a place for regulation, right? And I think that's really going to be the question right now over the next couple of years.
I say yes. Regulate away. There are a lot of libertarians, anarchists, and I don't mean the far left weirdos. I mean, Michael Malice's position is the government shouldn't be regulating these things. It should be more of a free market. I completely disagree. I think if anything a government should do is be like, hey, that food you're eating is not food, and that company's telling you it is. So we're going to just say, hey, don't do that. I know it's not easy, and the fear is often you give the authority to the government, they'll abuse it. But what's the alternative? All of our food, almost all of it.
When they talked about the
even
best bread in town,
emulsifiers,
they're talking about
right?
me.
Like Gelen gum and locust bean gum and these things. There are reports coming out saying that this is causing high rates of colon cancer because it's building up in the body. It's not being absorbed or digested, and it simulates creaminess. So, for instance, I have this. I used to drink this coconut milk. Really good. I'm not gonna attack the company, but I decided to stop drinking it because it's got emulsifiers in it for no reason, none whatsoever. I don't need my coconut milk to be fake milk. Just give me the coconut juice, is fine. But they put this stuff in it. Now, you go to the grocery store, a lot of the heavy cream you buy also has Gelen gum in it, an emulsifier to make it seem fattier.
Is a top secret.
Just give me regular food. I don't understand why they're putting all this stuff in here. And it sells better when it hits certain, palate expectations. So now, most of our food is poisoned, and not even that. Good luck finding food not sealed in plastic. So it's going to have PCBs and other stuff leached into it.
Everything's in plastic.
So, Tim,
Then we throw it in a plastic bag.
kind of support where you're coming from, I think. And I think, personally, I think this is a real challenge for MAHA. I think it's one of the most fundamental issues that Maha is going to have to grapple with as it moves from populism to policy to kind of long-term sustainable implementation, is how do we avoid the nanny state?
Interesting.
How do we avoid a situation in which the government has a overbearing hand on everything in our lives, which once the bureaucrats get a hold of things that have seem like a good idea, it often seems to go down that road. So here's an example. Glyphosate, Roundup. I mean, you're living out here in rural West Virginia, and everybody's
Things
using
are
Roundup
might
all the
be
time.
getting real here in a second.
What has happened over
This
the
section
last
is broken.
decade is the use of
Zach,
glyphosate
go
as a
seal the valve.
desiccant. Now, what does that mean?
Yeah, hold on.
When you're growing
pause this.
crops,
This might be an important scene.
What is that?
You average soldier members are Mako-infused humans. You're enhanced, but you're still human. But then, what are those things? Their Mako energy levels are exponentially higher than yours.
Are they monsters?
Yes. The Shinra scientist Hojo was the one who created them. Abominations spawned by Mako energy. That's what monsters are.
You said average member. What about you? Hey, Sephiroth.
Way to go, Zach. You're the one that cracked Sephiroth.
Could it be
Way to go, bro.
was created the same way? Am I the same as these monsters?
Yeah, you're like something like that.
I knew ever since I was a child. I was not like the others. I knew mine was a special existence. But this was not what I meant. Am I a human being?
No such luck. You are a monster. Sephiroth, you were the greatest monster created by the Genova Project.
Genesis! So you are alive.
I suppose I am, if you can call this living.
What is the Genova Project?
The Genova Project was the term used for all experiments relating to the use of Genova's cells.
My mother's cells?
Poor little Sephiroth. You've never actually met your mother. You've only been told her name, no? I don't know what images you've conjured up in your head, but...
Genesis! No!
Genova was excavated from a 2,000-year-old rock layer. She's a monster. Sephiroth, I need your help. My body is continuing to degrade.
Need some of that baby oil.
Soldier first
Some
class,
hand lotion.
Sephiroth.
Some Eucerin.
Genova Project G gave birth to Angeal and monsters like myself. Genova Project S.
S?
Used the remains of countless failed experiments to create a perfect monster.
What do you want of me?
Your traits cannot be copied onto others. Your genes can't be diffused. Therefore, your body cannot degrade.
It's kind of key.
Share your cells with me. My friend, your desire is the bringer of life, the gift of the goddess.
What's with the apple? He did. I don't want any of your apple. It's like the little kid on the playground. I'll share my apple with you.
Whether your words
Okay.
are lies created to deceive
You have at it.
or the truth that I have sought all my life. It makes no difference. You will rot.
I see. Perfect monster indeed. When the war of the beasts brings about the world's end, the goddess descends from the sky. Wings of light and dark spread afar. She guides us to bliss.
Walks in. Who are you talking to?
Everlasting.
Except for this is like long gone.
No! Stop!
What? Nobody's gonna eat the apple. Didn't look that healthy.
Damn.
Activating combat mode.
All right, back to it.
Corn, wheat, soybeans. You have to have a big harvester come through.
Shit, I'm gonna
To
move
harvest
this
them.
over here.
Those things are super expensive. Most farmers these days don't own one. They,
Cool.
they basically contract with a company that comes through and does it. And what does that mean in a practical sense? It means that you have to be able to say that on Wednesday the 23rd, we're going to be ready for you to bring in your machine. And it's going to cost a lot of money to do that. So how you do that? Because you can't naturally control when your crop is going to be ready, when the grain is going to be dry. So what do? As the grain is now matured, you go and spray the whole field with Roundup. Okay? And then it dies, and the harvester comes in and harvests all that. As a consequence, almost all of our wheat, soy, oats, Quaker oats, is contaminated with glyphosate, with Roundup. So who cares? Well, Bobby cares. This is one of the things that really made his career was the lawsuit against Monsanto having to do with Roundup. And by the way, this was not what was done a decade ago. So now you've got a situation in which your children and you are eating glyphosate without even knowing it.
So,
And does it matter? Why does it matter? Well, there's plenty of studies out now that show that Roundup ingestion in animal models in fetal development has two main impacts: autism and obesity. Ever heard those two before? The point is, this is something that's banned in Europe, just like the dyes. And I think this is a proper, as we talk about the kind of the fine line, where does the government step in and where do they stay behind?
Yeah.
I think that they have got to get toxins out of our food supply.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more than just educating people. I think that is something where it's clear cut.
real quick, you said glyphosate was banned in Europe?
Glyphosate in food.
Because a lot of
is
these
not
words,
banned.
like people just
okay.
hear it and they're like,
They-
well,
they do
whatever.
still
I don't know.
use
It's
it.
just like an additive
They
or
have
something. You know,
EU has it.
it's like
EU website.
no, it's like we
it's
need
approved
to
as an
actually
active substance until 2033.
lay it out for people.
with certain conditions and restrictions. How do they prevent it from getting in the food, though, if they're putting it on crops? I mean, obviously in the United States,
Oh, hello.
do they test the food to make sure it didn't contaminate it or something?
I don't know the nuances of what's going on in Europe in terms of how they're maintaining their integrity of their food supply. But I know in the United States there is testing done, and it's demonstrating that we have high levels of glyphosate in virtually all of our soybean and grain crops.
This is interesting. The website also, aside from saying they did approve it, mentions that the European Commission officially received the submissions of the fourth successful European Citizens Initiative by supporting the Stop Glyphosate European Citizens Initiative. Over 1 million citizens from at least 7 member states have called on the EU to propose member states ban a ban on glyphosate, to reform the pesticide approval procedure, and set EU-wide mandatory reduction targets for pesticide use. I guess my question then is, it's interesting. When I pull up the wiki, not like Wikipedia is the greatest source or anything like that, it just says it kills weeds. At some point, they decided instead of killing weeds that they were going to use it as a desiccant to prepare crops. Is that what happened?
Absolutely.
It seems it seems
A
strange.
what?
This is what I've heard from a lot of people, that basically it dries out the plants. So
it kills them.
Right.
The ones, no, by the way, the ones that are not genetically modified. The entire purpose of genetically modified food was to design vegetables that don't die when you spray this deadly poison on it, and everything else around it dies. So you're getting glyphosate on the GMO crops. The entire purpose of a GMO crop is one that is glyphosate resistant. And then you take the ones that aren't GMO crops and you kill them, which is why when you see a loaf of bread and it says non-GMO, that's not a good thing. People go, oh, it's like organic. No, it's nothing like organic. What it's saying is this was just regular wheat we poured glyphosate all over it before we ground it up and stuck it in this loaf of bread. So people need to recognize that non-GMO, sure, the crop wasn't designed to be Roundup resistant. They didn't want it to be because they used it the last minute to dry the entire crop out. So you're getting it no matter what you do. But I think to the point also, the farmers are terrified of Robert Kennedy Jr., people wanting to look at glyphosate. It's going to infect their entire industry. This is what they've gotten used to as modern farming. And now we've got to figure out, how do we move them back into regenerative farming, organic farming? Do they want to retrain? I mean, all of those things. This is what they know as farming. They have, GMO seeds that are, ready for the glyphosate to be poured all over them. Or, I mean, the entire, Monsanto has made the entire farming system based around their product. And they've got all farmers, I would say, hooked on it. It's not their fault. It's just what modern farming was going to be, until now we're waking up and say, wait a minute, it's killing us. Even the vegetables are bad for us.
Well, real quick, I guess I would call it the mainstream statement or view on glyphosate is that it is a misinformation campaign, that glyphosate causes autism or cancers. There's an article from Science-Based Medicine saying that Stephanie Seneff, a computer scientist at MIT, who thinks that gives her sufficient expertise in epidemiology to do studies in it, among her wider claims that glyphosate, GMOs, and other modern lifestyle factors are responsible for the recent increase in concussions. She's long been claiming glyphosate causes autism. Perhaps my favorite claim of hers is that by 2025, half of all children will be autistic. Julie Seneff is a master of inappropriately confusing correlation with causation. This is an op-ed. I find it interesting, but it is this is really strange. This is an opinion piece by David Gorski, but it is cited as a factual article by Wikipedia in the misinformation campaigns. It says, glyphosate has become a focus of campaigning and misinformation by anti-GMO activists because of its association with genetically modified glyphosate-resistant crops. U.S. politician R.F. Kennedy Jr. has incorporated glyphosate into his anti-vaccination rhetoric, falsely claiming that both glyphosate and vaccines may be contributing to the American obesity epidemic. I think I was going to say Stephanie Seneff also falsely claimed that it may have a role in autism. I'd like to find a better source than a couple of op-eds, but that's the only thing Wikipedia has.
So, Tim, this is why we write our Substack. So when we did our essay on glyphosate, we went to the primary literature. And we cited that primary literature and summarized it for people. So if you go into our Substack, you'll find the actual journal articles, and you can bypass all of this op-ed opinion from Wiki and the utilization of these terms like misinformation, which is just more part of the propaganda. Go to the basic science. Go to the peer-reviewed literature on the use of glyphosate and the testing that is being done on various animal models, because you're not going to feed glyphosate to children. or to pregnant women intentionally. You do that with laboratory models. But then what's also been done is a series of studies looking at, for instance, pregnancy in urine, maternal urine, and glyphosate contamination. And the glyphosate contamination being found in the urine of pregnant women is aligned with the levels that are known to be causing these effects in animal models. So that's how you do toxicology. So all of that, we've seen this again and again and again. You have this narrative that's built up and supported.
Sorry, I can't
And
say.
it persists long after the actual data are out there. And it's very difficult to break because they use these mechanisms to reinforce it. But you got to go back to the emerging science. And what happens is when you have a time when this science is not a thing, right? That's scientism. When you have change going on in the research data, often corporate media is way behind the curve, typically years. So that's why we do what we do with our Substack.
That makes a lot of sense as to why the corporate press is behind the curve, because they're well behind the research. It would be silly to think that some journalist in an office who's never been in a lab has the bleeding edge understanding of all this technology. What I will say is, are you familiar with BMJ.com?
Soldier is like a den of monsters.
And is this a prominent medical journal for publishing?
BMJ is a really quite a good journal.
Yeah.
They're not flawless like any medical journal.
But I just want to make sure I'm not pulling up some fly-by-night random conspiracy blog.
They are one of the few that has come through the COVID crisis with integrity.
So I wanted to I want to make sure that people who are listening understand BMJ is not some random conspiracy site, because they actually do have a peer-reviewed publication, Prenatal and Infant Exposure to Ambient Pesticides and Autism Spectrum Disorder in Children, population-based case control study, with the conclusion: findings suggest that an offspring's risk of autism spectrum disorder increases following prenatal exposure to ambient pesticides.
Hold on, Tam.
2,000
Hold on.
meters, I'm assuming, of the
Tam.
mother's residence.
I'm one to talk. I'm with soldiers, so fighting's all I do. Sorting things out is someone else's job. What's going on? Who's the enemy? It makes no difference to me.
What are you gonna swing at?
Hey, Zach. I really like that sword. It's impressive.
Use brings about wear, tear, and rust. And that's a real waste. You're a little more important than my sword. But just a little.
Embrace your dreams, and whatever happens, protect your soldier honor.
Yeah, don't be a little bitch.
This is a symbol of my dreams and honor. No, it's more. That's right. I had almost forgotten.
Start swinging that thing around your room.
Cloud. Huh? Right. I'm gonna crash. Night.
Yeah. 3 squats before bed? Or was that 2? Don't want to do 3. Be sleeping all night. Where tonight? All right.
During pregnancy, compared with offspring of women from the same agricultural region without such exposure. infant exposure could further increase risk for autism spectrum disorder with comorbid
All right.
intellectual disability. They do include a correction citing that there was an oversight and a potential conflict of interest. I want to make sure everybody understands that. But this is what BMJ has as a published, peer-reviewed journal on the issue. And so, what I just find interesting, when you pull up glyphosate on Wikipedia, you want to talk about how the media operates. Happens to be one of my biggest critiques of my biggest focuses. One of my focuses. Misinformation campaigns in the glyphosate Wikipedia, where it cites an opinion piece. I was surprised to see that it linked to science-based medicine, and it was an opinion piece. I figured I'd click on it and it would give me a peer-reviewed journal, claiming that it's misinformation to make that connection. Meanwhile, an actual peer-reviewed journal on BMJ.com states that they did find that there was an increased risk with autism spectrum disorder based on ambient pesticides. Why is Wikipedia allowing its editors to place an opinion, an op-ed, not a scientific journal, as a citation to call it misinformation?
Okay.
Meanwhile, BMJ actually has a study which says you actually found this.
I promise.
Now, I have no problem saying if it's contentious and there's conflicting scientific studies, then it requires more data. I have no problem saying that. I have no problem saying some have found that it may actually do this. Others have contested it. I think it's a fair thing to do. Why would Wikipedia put an op-ed as a scientific citation? Well, that seems absurd.
So, Tim, one of the things about Wikipedia, I've had to dig into this because, of course, I'm slandered and defamed on Wikipedia in every which way, and they still claim that. Yes, I'm
mine's
sure.
locked. I can't. No one can change it. Like they locked in all the negative stuff on me, and you can't do anything about it.
Wikipedia has some quirks,
Of course they
just
did.
like a lot of the AIs do. A lot of the AIs and Wikipedia don't actually cite peer-reviewed literature. They have a list of sources that you're allowed to use in building your edits to the Wikipedia page. And most of those are aligned with the Trusted News Initiative. They're basically the big news outlets. And so they don't go into peer-reviewed literature. That's actually disallowed both by many of the AIs for training purposes as well as for Wikipedia. And so you find the
snaps, the
situation
mansion.
like, just not to make it about myself, but I had all of these attacks that are recited again and again and again on Wikipedia, but no references to my actual 100-plus peer-reviewed papers. That's not allowed. It's a very strange ecosystem, information ecosystem associated with Wikipedia that's really biased towards supporting and enforcing corporate media.
I'd like to just pull up.
Still do
one
VR
other.
missions,
I
realized.
I actually have many different studies. This is. I hope everybody's.
It would have been dumb if you couldn't.
Let me just give you the quick overview one more time before I show all of these different studies, which maybe they're wrong. I have no idea. I'm not a scientist, right? At the very least, if there is a debate over the issue, and there are claims by people in science-based mag or whatever that website is, claiming it's misinformation, it should be, here is a scientific study that found no correlation or inconclusive data, and here's a study that challenges, here's a study that supports. The issue is widely debated, with some saying yes, some saying no. I'm fine with that, if that was the case. But when they lead with, it's misinformation because this guy called the woman stupid and said so, and then I just Googled it, and I have a list of various peer-reviewed studies showing a link between either glyphosate, autism spectrum disorders, autism-related disorders, or pesticide in general. This one from, and I think this is the stupidest name for a journal, but they went with it, PNAS. So
it's the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Well, I want to just jump in because you're pointing out the exact problem in the world we live in.
Real
right?
quick, just so I can show this real quick. This
Nobody
is
was like,
maternal glyphosate exposure causes autism-like behaviors in offspring through increased expression
maybe
of
we should try
soluble epoxide
another name.
hydrolase. And this is PNAS. They're going to mention that there's a correction for this article that I should check out. And there's always
Trusted
something in it
institution,
where they say correction,
PNAS.
yada, 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 by these individuals. First published, the author's note. The author's name should appear as Debin, not Debin 1, not Wang. They apologize
What am
for
I
the error.
looking for
But when they
through
put
this
out
thing?
this thing and saying there's a correction on it, that's often used to say, hey, this is not legit. Yeah. There's a SCRP.
Speed up camera.
You're familiar with SCRP? Is that another?
I don't know what the acronym is. I don't know.
Scientific Research Academic, SCIRP.
So that is not if you want to dig into this, this is actually Journal of Behavioral and Brain Science.
Ah, I see. It's
Okay.
listed up there. This is an aggregator.
I mean, if you want to look, you should just look at the research that got presented in the courts, because Bayer Monsanto had to settle billions in
I have no
lawsuits, right,
idea.
for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that's what.
NHL, yes. So
Yeah.
this is the
Yeah,
links
yeah,
to
and that-
obesity and autism is new science that's coming.
Yeah, and it's
But-
because there's too many confounding variables. It's hard to prove
But
in
let's-
a court of law. That's what Bobby was arguing.
I will just say settlement does not mean fact.
No.
A company that settles usually settles because litigation is more expensive, and that's probably the majority of lawsuits.
But typically, in order to have a precedent, there's like there's a lot of science.
I don't know.
In order to even
I'm
have
not
that
sure what I'm
precedent.
supposed to
That's
do
what
with
kind of
that.
Bobby-
But, I mean,
I disagree with the lawsuit thing. I don't think it's a good
Yeah,
example.
but I think you have to get to this point: is what we're all trying to say is
That
there a
guy.
signal or is there not a signal? Does this deserve more research? And we're living in a time where they keep telling us the science is settled. There are laws right now that they're trying to pass all across this country to give the same liability protection to glyphosate that's sprayed on all of our crops, so you will never be able to sue. You'll never be able to go into the courtroom again, just like we have with vaccines. So why would you need liability protection if the product is perfectly safe? We know we have issues. These are real signals. And to your point, Wikipedia, our media, mainstream, is absolutely screaming misinformation. They did it all throughout COVID. We have a congressional investigation, a 500-page document that comes out and says social distancing, 6 feet, was made up, had no science behind it, even though Tony Fauci stood in front of cameras and said to us, if you question me, you're questioning the science. Now he
'Cause
admits
I
in
am the
Congress there was no
science.
science in the 6-foot distance rule. There is no science that masks actually stop transmission. All of these, the vaccine couldn't stop transmission, even though it said it was 95% effective. Yet still, every one of those news organizations talk about those of us that called that out from the very beginning, that we're still the ones spreading misinformation when our government clearly caught. Rand Paul has pointed this out.
When you're
clearly
criticizing
one
me, you're
distributing
really just
misinformation.
criticizing
Continue.
science.
Wikipedia is a misinformation vessel, and most of mainstream is. But can we just talk really quickly, because the science around this glyphosate in the gut and autism, first of all, I'd be the first to say we don't have enough science on any of this. It is so hard to get decent investigations because you're being blocked by the industry itself, which has been controlling your regulatory agencies, which is the light at the end of the tunnel with Robert Kennedy Jr. You finally have someone that doesn't work for any of these industries going in and saying, we're going to do real peer-reviewed science and put it all on the table. But what's very fascinating about glyphosate, whether it does or does not, autism, the heart of this, the whole MMR conversation with Andrew Wakefield, who's the big baddie, the first doctor to ever connect MMR and
Cool.
And the potential of autism. But it was an intestinal study. The guy he was a gastroenterologist back in the late 1990s. Who all these parents said, my child has what looks like Crohn's disease, but they got it right after they had autism, and I'm wondering if there's a connection. That's what his study started with. It got sidetracked into being about a vaccine, but the question was this a neurological disorder or was it a gut disorder? And what he started
Just
looking
leave
into is
him
it
be.
appears to be directly connected with the gut. Now they're doing studies where they do fecal
Open it back up.
transplant. They take a healthy child's feces and put it in the intestine of an autistic child, and that child does better. They've been doing it in rats. It's amazing. And they can do the opposite. They can take autistic rats, take their feces, and put it into a healthy rat and make it start having autism qualities. So we're in a whole new space now where your gut health appears to be affecting our neurological health, right?
You watch South Park?
Very rarely.
Very
South
rarely,
Park,
but
yeah.
they did that episode where everyone was trying to steal Tom Brady's feces because
Yeah.
because the health effects of the transplant. You mentioned early on the free market was likely the problem. With everything we're talking about in media, there was that viral video of this news program is brought to you by Pfizer, over and over and over again. And I don't know that it's necessarily a free market when you have monopolistic forces. And I turn on Fox News every day. And I got to tell you, my absolute favorite commercial is, have you seen the Fanapt Peridone or whatever it's called? It's like this anime woman opening her shop and smiling, and she sees an elderly couple laughing. The whole time it's telling you about this medication that can kill you, cause stroke, prolongs the QT interval, which is associated with heart arrhythmia or sudden death, and how it's like,
Genova verified as an ancient. MEGL 9/13/1977. Genova project approved. Mako Reactor 1 authorized for use. My mother's name, Genova. The Genova Project. Is it coincidence? Professor Gast, why didn't you tell me? Why did you die? Leave me.
All right.
From that day, Sephiroth shut himself inside Shinra Manor. And continued to review documents like a man possessed. The lights in the basement never went out once. Sephiroth.
What gives, brother?
Yes, I'm coming for you.
You can see most of it. Did I pass up treasure right there? Yeah. Dang on.
How could you?
Thank.
How could you?
Oh no, I was just seeing Ishmael.
Activating combat mode.
Out of the way.
Oop, not that one. Yes, that one.
Take that.
Conflict resolved.
Got him.
Okay.
Activating combat mode. Conflict resolved.
Oh yeah.
It lists all these insane side effects where it's like, that sounds scarier than whatever it is the person's is bipolar, one disorder, whatever. But we have these commercials. To me, they're absolutely insane, and they're funding
there's
all
a
of our
lot
news
of them
programs,
too.
even Fox News.
Right. That's right. So everything you're watching, your news reporters,
Conflict
their
resolved.
boss, because I worked for CBS, I worked on the daytime talk to the doctors. My boss ultimately is mostly the pharmaceutical industry. If you want to run a story that goes against a product of theirs, you will not work very long for that network. And
Activating combat
that's just the
mode.
way it goes.
But Del, can you kind of dig in a little bit? So the dynamic
bomb.
here is more complex than just that. My understanding is that pharma is basically shoveling money at media as a way to co-opt media. It's not just to advertise these things to the consumer. All that money co-opts media kind of prospectively, so that media has this bias that we won't run stories
Activating combat
that
mode.
are contrary to the interests of our big sponsors, because we don't want to lose that that nipple.
Well, it's another kind of marketing that people need to be aware of. There's the overt.
Resolved.
Coca-Cola buys a billboard saying buy our product, and then there's the social repercussion of the advertising, which I talk about why we advertise. And a few years ago, we bought a bunch of ads in Times Square. We bought the whole North Tower on New Year's Eve was Timcast.
Bring it on.
And that's not, the intention is not so that people see it and come watch the show. It's a cultural
Holy
impact
resolved.
ad. We want people to think certain things about what our company does, what it represents, not necessarily to know it exists, but we want industry leaders to think certain things. So when we see the buys of these advertisements, to your point, Dr. Malone, they're not necessarily trying to make people call their doctor and say, I want to buy this. They're trying to say, we own you to the journalists, to the editors, and create this effective barrier. While some marketing will sell a product for you, hey, everybody buy my soda, other marketing protects you from negative marketing.
It's the power of the withdrawal of the ad. Their power is in, we will pull our ads from you and stop paying you if you keep doing stories like that. That is what they're buying, right? Just like Tony Fauci, who distributed billions of dollars around the world.
Tony Science to you,
basis,
pal.
You know, to do studies. The power is in withdrawing that funding from a university. So anytime a university wants to do a study on glyphosate or wants to do a study on anything,
ring.
You know, ring. Hey, I see here we gave you $10 million last year. We were planning on doing that this year, but we don't like this professor you've worked with, right?
Nice research program you have there. It would be a shame if something happened to it.
That's right.
And that's where it comes back to what was your original question? Is like, why are we in this state? It's misaligned incentives, and I would disagree. I don't think it's a free market.
You're rusting the sword, bro.
Mother, let's take back the planet together. I had an epiphany. Let's go to the promised land.
How would Cloud know all of this took place?
Why did you kill the townspeople? Why did you hurt Tifa?
I don't get it.
Answer me, Sephiroth!
Unless it's like when Zack dies, he becomes like part of the Cloud or the life stream, and it goes into Cloud or something. I don't know.
You should have ruled this planet.
Doesn't really make a ton of sense.
Stronger, smarter. But then they came. Those inferior dullards. They came and took this planet away from you.
Stolen land.
But don't be sad, Mother. I am with you now. We meet at last, Mother.
Sephiroth! What the hell happened to you? Ah! Sephiroth! I trusted you! Ah!
So this is after Cloud was like, oh, I don't remember what happened after that. What does happen?
Activating combat mode.
Owie. Not up in here. Oh my. What's going on?
Conflict resolved.
The magic in this game is super powerful. Hits way harder than the blade. I feel like they do hook you up with fire pretty early. I got that at like chapter 4 or something like that.
I am the chosen one. I have been chosen to rule this planet.
Seems like a good time. This is the banger. Jump on park. Driven to the edge of the game is over. Oh, I don't like it. Oh, there's gonna be some garden up in her. Oh, that ain't nice. Oh God. Oh, I didn't even get a hit on him. That ain't nice. Was he partying? Oh, I guarded the whole thing. Get out. I fireball you. Just spam the fireballs. Sephiroth is weak in this. Yeah, Cloud, you don't remember what happened afterwards? You spammed fireballs. That's what happened. It's just a lot of fireballs. Sephiroth is like, stab, stab, But didn't he, like, stab him? And then, like, he took control of the sword when he was being stabbed? Or is that this right here? Oh, that's why Cloud remembers. He was just watching. He was just outside the door, like... Damn. You get stabbed by that, you're just chopped in half. The thing is so big. So it was just a minor cut.
How dare you?
Cloud. Finish Sephiroth off.
You're dying and you gotta save that. It's like a tongue twister. Sephiroth off. 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 Sephiroth. Sephiroth. Off. I love the piano.
Don't test me.
Here it is.
No. Impossible.
Yeah. So Cloud is a boss. Just his head bobbing down the stairs.
You did it.
Yeah, you did. Is this Flojo?
Here. Intriguing. Most intriguing. He'll make a fine test subject.
Yeah. Cleared chapter 8. Okay, so yeah, there must be 10. I can't imagine there being 12 chapters. We almost there, guys. We're almost there.
You tarnish the soldier name.
And deal! Wait!
Those wings. I want them too.
I just want to be able to fly. That'd be kind of key. I don't even... Does that mean he's just more likely to show up in the DMW slot machine thingy? What broke out of its curl? Oh, it's him. All right.
Cloud.
Did you drown in there? I think we got some new missions.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah, get up, Cloud. Being all lazy and stuff. Gall.
Wait right here. Let me go and take a look around.
Market, because it's not free. There's so much government intervention. There's so much big corporation manipulation. I mean, the food system, the ag, for example, how many billions in subsidies have we paid?
That is the libertarian point of view.
And then
we really don't have a free market.
No, and I'm joking.
No, I know.
But you're right.
The tricky thing is, what's the appropriate response then? What's the appropriate response to like fighting against something that the deck's been stacked in the opposite direction so much?
Look at what we just saw with the EPA. Liesel, did you guys hear this story? They found a $375 billion slush fund that was giving climate change grants. One nonprofit was formed a month before receiving $7 billion. There apparently were two funds, and I'm not accusing anybody of any wrongdoing, but the New York Post referenced Climate Justice Fund and Justice Climate Fund. Both, one receiving $1 billion, one receiving $7 billion, I think were the numbers. It's not a free market.
No.
You have, there's one story where a guy worked for a nonprofit, and then he got hired by the Biden administration, immediately then started awarding grants back to the nonprofit. We see people who work for big pharmaceutical companies and big agricultural companies taking jobs at the FDA. It's not free market when the government is giving out billions and billions in direct cash subsidies and grants to make something happen. It looks like the free market because those somethings then buy advertisements on TV.
I will say this: when I had read Ayn Rand, early on in when I was in my 20s, and Atlas Shrugged, and of course like sort of the godmother, I guess, of libertarian thought, or certainly deep in it. And it pissed me off because I was a liberal. Like by the end of the book, I was like, wait a minute, this is pissing me. I thought I was with it. Now you're pissing me off. And it used to always bother me because I thought, in the idea sort of like survival of the fittest, but she didn't sort of deal with monopolies. I felt like ultimately survival of the fittest. If you get enough money in your family, you're passing on your money. Eventually, can the Koch brothers, are their children going to be the smartest people running our country? They have an advantage because they're financially strong. And then when I started getting into the issues and investigations that got me into all the trouble that I'm in now, I went back because I was like, maybe I'm missing something. And I remember I typed in Ayn Rand monopolies. And it popped up. It was an old Donahue. I don't know, it's way before your guys' time, but this talk show called Donahue. And she was on. He asked my exact question. He's like, but Ayn, it's a very interesting, idea that survival of the fittest. But what about monopolies? Certainly a company, the train company in the center of, Atlas Shrugged. This family makes enough money. They don't have to be the smartest any longer. They have power. And she said, if you show me a monopoly that did not get government funding, then I will, if you show me one, I will never speak again. She said, I want to be perfectly clear. I'm against welfare for the poor, and I'm against welfare for the rich. And what we have is a welfare for the rich. Our government gets involved. It chooses the better products, and it changes the entire natural course of all business. And I think that's what we have to look at. It's what we're talking about.
This is the Murray Rothbard position, who is really more of the intellectual guns behind modern the term is anarcho-capitalism. He coined it. That's the Austrian School of Economics that Javier Milei comes from. And this is precisely his point, is that monopolies only exist when government creates them.
Right. Right. When solar is a great idea, does it make sense to pour, billions of dollars of then we throw it out, or electric cars? At a certain point, a market takes over. I mean, it's a good question. How does it compete? But you look at when Bobby Kennedy or anyone you want to get in, you can't. If you just said, let's just take away all subsidies, our nation is it's all built on band-aids on band-aids. If you tear them off, which is what Trump's doing right now, it's gonna hurt. You know.
I agree largely with the talk about government funding and manipulation and how it controls markets. But there still is a question around artificial dyes, for instance, in foods, because like you were saying earlier, the brighter colors sell better. And you can go back to the stories of the old snake oil salesman. 10 years ago, I was at a mall. You ever see a balance bracelet? You guys know what balance bracelets are? Yeah. it's a lie, is what it is. And what these companies were doing were selling rubber bands, silicon bracelets, and then using a magic trick known to every magician, known as the center of gravity illusion, where you ask a person to. So they do this trick to. It's largely pattern distraction. To claim that an object is imbued with magic powers, which they're then going to make disappear or levitate or who knows what. You tell someone it's got magic powers, put it in your hand. And then, or actually you say, put your arms out, stand on one leg. They will put their hand on your arm and pull slightly at a downward, rightward angle away from your center of gravity, causing you to fall over. They will then hand you the magical object imbued with great chi, and you'll hold it in your hand. They then push down slightly towards the center of gravity. To the average person, they don't recognize the slight shift, but when you're pushing towards center of gravity, the person cannot fall. So they're being pushed down, and they're like, why aren't I falling over? A company figured out this thing and started selling rubber bands, telling everybody the rubber band will improve your performance. They were in malls all across the country. They made, I think, tens of millions of dollars before the FTC stepped in and said, stop tricking people and stealing their money, selling them $50 rubber bands. There is the question of the nanny state. We don't want to be like Mike Bloomberg, who went on TV and said, tax the poor, don't let them buy large sodas, because they're stupid and they hurt themselves. But there is a line, right, where we're like, bro, you can't sell rubber bands for $50 and use a magic.
I agree. And the example I like to use is, there's a strong case to be made that modern McDonald's diet causes obesity, and obesity is one of the major drivers of diabetes and a variety of health problems.
Activating combat mode.
But do we want to have the state saying that you can't eat McDonald's hamburgers and drink sugary Coca-Colas? We don't. That's, I think most of us would agree that's not okay. But then the converse is, if those McDonald's products are using, let's say, seed oils in their manufacturing, that is associated with health risks that are, above and beyond the call, and they don't have to do those things. Does the state have the right to say, no, we're not going to allow you to use seed oils? Now, I'm not advocating that position right now, but I'm making the point.
Can I ask about seed oils, though? Do you have a position on seed oils?
Absolutely. Seed oils, I'm convinced, are a major driver in our obesity crisis.
What is the mechanism for that?
It has to do with their metabolism or absence of metabolism and the storage of the fatty product, to the best of my knowledge. I'm not an expert on it.
So, are you guys familiar at all with the seed oil thing?
Just lightly. I'm not a scientist on it either. I'm cutting seed oils out just because.
Why not?
Why not? Like, while we're at it, I'm going to assume it's correct.
It's toxic. If you look into how they're produced, it's, there's so many chemical derivatives just to get a seed to the seed oil end product. They're extracting it with chemicals like hexane, and then they're putting deodorizers in on it. And then it's a polyunsaturated fat, so it oxidizes greater naturally, and then it sits on the shelf in a clear plastic bottle, and the only reason it's not, obviously rancid is because they put all these deodorizers and coloring in it. So it's really a toxic end-to-end product. You could make a more natural seed oil if it was like cold press and all that, and debate what health ramifications that has, but typically from just end to end, like a canola oil is just extremely toxic.
Is that the canola is the seed?
Yes, it comes from the rapeseed plant.
Interesting.
Those are those fields you see with the yellow bloom.
And then they're also, of course, a monocrop, getting back to being sprayed with glyphosate and Roundup.
I read it. We planted sunflowers a couple years ago, and they're amazing. And it's crazy when you take the head, you bash it, and the seeds go flying out. And I was reading how indigenous natives, they would take all the seeds and they'd press it using like wood planks or something, and they get the oil out of it. And so I thought it was kind of strange when people said seed oils are bad, and I'm like, but people have been eating sunflower seed oils. So is it really the seed themselves, or as you're saying, is it the process and the toxification after the fact?
It's both, because then imagine what quantity are you actually going to be able to do that at if you did it like manually. Like it's not a very scalable process to like naturally extract and cold press. So the fact that we're consuming this quantity of seed oils and then the oxidized linoleic acid and everything is the real problem. It's comprising such a large portion of calories that our biology is not meant for that, and it's really a mitochondrial toxin at the end of the day.
So I've heard avocado oil, olive oil are really good. Are y'all familiar with Brian Johnson?
That's
The
all
guy
we
who wants to
really
live
use
forever?
is avocado
He
and
said
olive.
a teaspoon of olive oil with every meal is one of the most powerful anti-aging things you can do. Is there any concern about animal proteins? He's a vegan. That's why I bring it up.
I would prefer to always cook with like a saturated fat because it's going to be the least prone to oxidation when you're cooking at high heat. So I personally cook with butter or beef tallow. But then if you have a good extra virgin olive oil, drizzle that on top or use it as finishing, or if you're cooking at low temperatures, I think that's great. But the problem with olive oil and avocado oil is like 80 to 90% of them on the shelves in the store are actually cut with seed oils. And this goes back to this whole like marketing and
Just trying
labeling
something.
problem that we have in our food system as well.
Have you? Let me
I
ask you
don't
guys a
know
question.
why
If you
that
went to a
number
restaurant
popped into my head.
and they had a meat, it said meat steak entree with an asterisk next to it, would you? And like, would you eat something described as generic meat product, or like, would you have questions about it?
I don't really know what you mean. Is there such
Like
a
if
thing?
some-
Like it's not
well-
meat, or is it a processed?
No, like you
meat?
go to a restaurant and you're like, "Do you have steak? We have meat steak." Would you ask?
That would freak me out.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
What's meat
For sure.
Is it, what's meat steak and why are you calling it that?
Right,
Can't you
yeah.
tell me if it's beef or bison?
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I bison steak is, and I bring this up because, my buddy Luke, I bring him up because he's a crazy health nut, right? He has a card, and it says, "Here are all the things I cannot eat," and he hands it to the waiter, and then basically forces them to disinfect and sterilize the kitchen. But he asked the
Activating
question,
combat mode.
what do you fry your foods in? And they say, I'll check. And do you know what they always say? Vegetable oil.
Yeah, right.
And to which my response was, which one?
Right.
They don't know.
Yeah.
And so I have concerns about what that literally means because, I mean, there's some vegetables, like, we've got poisonous vegetables outside. I assume the majority of vegetables you can't actually eat.
Well, I mean, and I think that the seed oils is being called a vegetable
Yeah,
oil. So I mean,
it's the same
like,
stuff.
It's all
That is
term.
pure labeling for vegetable as a positive connotation. That's why they changed the name from like rapeseed oil to canola oil too. 'Cause it's like, you're gonna buy rape.
But this gets into a fundamental thing. What is the role of the USDA?
Yeah.
And the structure is that actually FDA has oversight in terms of food safety over
People who work
USDA.
here.
So what is the role for USDA and FDA
People who
under
work
MAHA to ensure that we have transparency in labeling? I think that's one of the key issues of MAHA is that consumers have the right to know. And there's a lot of this, it is misinformation. They are basically inventing words or substituting language that's being allowed by our regulatory authorities in order to avoid true transparency to the consumer so that they have informed information they need to make an informed choice. And that, I think, as we talk about these fine issues about nanny state, etc., I think one thing that we should all be able to agree on is that we have truth in labeling. And there's so many ways that that's twisted. For instance, one of the ones that I love, you seem to be pretty aware of the agriculture industry and beef and chicken, etc. So did you know that increasingly our meat is coming from the rainforest? It's coming from Brazil, the biggest meat packer in the world that's kind of sweeping over and controlling all of our meat processing is Brazilian. And the rule is that they can import animal products, we could call it food, into the United States from offshore whatever source. And by the way, those sources have different rules in terms of pesticides, vaccines, all kinds of things. They can import it into the United States, and all they have to do is basically put a knife on that meat, and then it can be labeled as made in the United States. And you have no visibility in terms of what the chain is that brought that food to your table. The only thing that you can do in the face of all this is try to seek out local farmers and buy, here in Virginia, we love to buy local Virginia grass-fed beef. And where you're buying it from the farmer, and typically it's a smaller farmer. This is kind of the whole Joel Salatin issue. Is getting away from these huge factory farms that's producing major amounts of pork, chicken, and imported beef, and back to more of a local, bottom-up, decentralized food supply for our meats, because basically the industry has figured out all these different ways to kind of cook the books.
I think you have to get back. I think what Bobby's going to have to do is get back to actually, as taxpayers, we're going to have to decide that we want to fund unbiased studies being done by our own science body that's hopefully selected by people like Robert Kennedy Jr. What I didn't realize before I started investigating the pharmaceutical industry is that the industries are doing all the safety trials. They're doing their own studies. They're cherry picking their own study. So they're not even, one of the things Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to do right away is he's saying, when he says radical transparency, he's going to make every industry show every study they did, not just the ones that gave them the result they wanted, so that we can say, wait a minute, because all we're seeing when you're at the FDA, if you're going to a VRBAC committee, which is the committee that decides whether a drug gets onto the market, or you go to the CDC's ACIP committees,
books. I need to figure out the
all
books.
You're
That's the
seeing from
last
the industry
one.
is the study that proved what they wanted to
So
prove.
2
This
is
product actually
7,
pulled this off. You don't
3
see the
is
5 that failed. The 5 trials that failed.
Oh, the
Let-
so
we
3
saw
is
all of the
3.
trials that were going on.
7,
I think we might have a
3.
different perspective.
Just to clarify, you're saying a company will do
Those are
a
4
study,
chairs.
fail,
7, 3, 4.
do another study,
Hide it.
fail,
Hide it.
7,
do
3,
another,
4.
do another study and say,
7,
we
3,
got it.
4,
We got it.
so
It's-
whatever
It's
the
worse than that.
Changing,
It's
right.
worse than that, Tim.
books.
So, as
Where
somebody
did you
who's
see
an
those
expert in
books?
regulatory
Yeah, this is the guy,
affairs,
yeah.
what
Where
the
go?
general rules are in pharma is you don't ever do any study that the FDA doesn't require you to do because you might get a bad outcome and screw
No,
up
that's
your
not right.
product. Okay, so
Go back.
that's one of the reasons why they don't investigate these things that we're all perplexed about. How come you didn't look into this?
Yeah.
Now, another thing that what Dell's pointing to, this kind of suppression of information or failure to reveal key information. That is technically not allowed in terms of the FDA, and that's a case of not enforcing the regs that are on the books. So the rules are that if you're, Corporation X and you're developing product Y, and some academic somewhere does a study that relates to product
It's not in
Y,
this room,
you're
right?
supposed to put that in your regulatory package and disclose it to the FDA. They're supposed to, you talk about radical transparency. The rules are that they're supposed to be radical transparency, and they're not being enforced. And that is, I think, one of the big things, and that's where you get to the corruption of the FDA because of these revolving door relationships, et cetera, is we created a kind of a government culture where it's okay to only enforce the rules that you want to enforce and only enforce them for those companies that aren't with you. So for big pharma, they get to slide on all kinds of stuff, whereas small biotech
Am I outside
innovators
now? Okay,
have
that's
the
not
rule
right.
book thrown at them, and that whole dynamic has got to change. It gets back to government creating monopolies, and one of the ways they do it is they give special
check through
allowance
these.
to the big boys that allows them to engage in these practices.
Or on top of that, the big boys have the legal means to challenge
did I see that
government
one?
resources in court and win, whereas smaller producers don't have that same ability.
True.
Even more, the most surprising thing
Look
to
through
me
this one.
in
What's
working
the
with Bobby
chairs?
and starting to really, I was looking at the list of jobs he had to fill. He's going to have 80,000 employees underneath him. He
Pretty
got
much
to
checked
add
over
like
there.
300 of his own, and just looking at how this whole thing works.
Or is it this one?
But
Oh,
what
it
you
is
don't
this one, okay.
realize, what I didn't realize is that the big industries will act like, oh my God, all the regulations have got our hands tied. It's terrible dealing with the FDA. They're the ones
It's
that
gotta
set
be
the
like
regulations.
Yes,
those books up
They're the
there,
ones that
I'm
demanded
guessing.
it.
It's
They
precisely.
prefer it.
This is another key thing, okay?
4?
Is that regulations are the friend of the big boys, the big players, because they're the only ones that have the capital and the
Maybe.
infrastructure in order to meet those regulatory requirements. And
I
so
guess. That's the only
regulations
ones that are
serve
really
to
standing
exclude
out.
the smaller or to mid-sized
So
innovators.
4.
Yeah.
Which is what the big boys, whether it's big ag or big pharma or fill in the blank, they
Right.
like to have that complex regulatory environment because it gives them a competitive advantage because their small innovator competitors can't comply with the federal requirements.
Let me ask you guys: would you eat cloned meat?
Wait, what was it?
No.
Probably are. This is how crazy things have gotten in this country. The story's from 10 years ago, just about 10 years ago.
4,
Alex Jones came on Timcast IRL, and
4,
it's fascinating to listen to
7,
this guy because he says
3, 4.
things, and you're
4,
sitting
7,
there
3,
thinking,
4.
this guy's out of his
Let's
mind.
try that.
He's sitting here being like, we're having a conversation, and he abruptly goes, well, now you got all these people eating cloned beef. They're eating animals. They're cloning animals. We're eating them. And I'm like, Alex, stop. No, we're not. And he goes, wait, what?
Piss.
Google it. And I Googled it, and from phys.org, are you eating cloned meat? The answer is probably. The FDA cleared in 2008 cloned beef to be consumed. We don't track for
All
it.
right, what is it?
And so there are a lot of
I tried.
producers that find desirable traits within cows. Look at the popularity
Tried
of Wagyu.
as hard as I care
Do
to
you
try.
want to go through the arduous process of certified Wagyu A7 Japanese? Sure, if you're in Japan. But what if you're doing Brazilian Wagyu or whatever? You take a sample of the animal and you clone it a bunch of times, and now you've got meat to sell. So this actually is.
Oh, it's random.
We don't know
Great.
for sure how much cloned meat we're actually eating. We probably are eating it without realizing it. The things that have happened in I can't remember what documentary it was.
But the
where it
books,
showed
though,
how
like
they
which
made
books?
Common beef for fast food, and they take like 20%
That's
of
the
the
one
beef
that's confusing.
pulverized into a pulp, mix it with cleaners and like ammonia to sterilize it, and then mix it back in as a filler to the existing beef.
I think this was the supersize.
Was that supersize meat?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's things like that we don't realize is in our food, and they can claim all of it is still beef.
Yeah, yeah. So that's another problem. Is again, it gets back to truth in labeling, and that's the combination of USDA and FDA kind of allowing these things to get through and giving allowance to the big producers. I love the whole messaging of Kelly and Casey Means that the tobacco industry, when it got its haircut, turned and moved a lot of their investments, that we're talking about R.J. Reynolds, into big food. And that the case is made by the Means, and I think it's pretty persuasive, that the same business model applies, that we are being hooked on food by processing food so that it has these characteristics that are really addictive for us in terms of our palate and our brain response, like you were talking about the emulsifiers, fats, sugars. These things just go into our little monkey brain and say, this is the stuff you want. And they have made a business that is entirely parallel to the business model of tobacco, of getting you hooked on the product. But they've transformed the whole large food industry into using that same business model.
Y'all know, you know the story of sucralose? You guys know what that is?
Yeah.
Artificial sweetener?
Yeah.
I think most people would be surprised to find out that the artificial sweetener packet they like to put in their coffee was discovered when I believe it was a researcher, was trying to make a pesticide. By
Yeah, I'm
combining
pretty sure I did it
chlorine with
right.
sugar to
I
kill
don't know
insects.
why. Hold on.
Misunderstood his professor, who said, test it, and he thought he said, taste it. So he did, and said, tastes good. And they were like, really? The intention was pesticide. I think it was bonding chlorine with sugar. And now we have a widely available alternative sweetener, they call it, which is, it's always strange to me that clearly there's questions about whether that will be safe for human consumption, and they say, don't worry, it is. And I'm like, maybe you just don't.
The assumption of safety.
This
right?
is this is analogous to the origin of glyphosate we were talking about a minute ago, where it was it was a
It's
pipe
industrial pipe cleaner. It draws the rust and stuff out
and
of it.
It's antibiotic, right? I think
it is an antibiotic.
And-
it kills everything inside.
And they found that the areas around where they're using it for cleaning the pipes had no weeds, and they said, "Oh, we got a new indication."
There's 3.
I want to get to the, I want to talk just because there's a very interesting conversation. I think your audience is capable of understanding it, and it's something that was new to me. And Whitney Webb actually went after a guy named Jim O'Neill, who I met. I'm not going to vouch for the guy, but I did have a very interesting conversation, and she was really upset with this perspective he has, which is getting rid of efficacy inside of the FDA. I think it's a very, very interesting conversation, though. And when he
It's
explained
4.
it to me,
I mean, I see
and
4
I'd be curious
in the
where
top
you're
corner.
at, Dr. Malone. But what he said is, did you know that the FDA's original mandate was just for safety and purity? It was only designed to say what's in this bottle is what's written on this label, and is it safe? That's all it was there to do. Years into it, the pharmaceutical industry said, we think that you should be involved in efficacy. You have to determine what the thing does. Can it do what it says it does? And so they did. They got involved, and that was the beginning, sort of the $100 million randomized control trials. Now you have the big expense to
See a
get a
chair
product out
over
there to
there.
be able to say, oh, it cures cancer, it does this. only the pharmaceutical industry can afford it. That's where vitamins can't make any claim. Nobody else can make a claim. And that's where the FDA
So I see
took
4
over the
chairs.
industry. And if you think about it, if it's
Pretty sure
involved in
that's 4
efficacy,
chairs,
it
right?
immediately becomes a marketing arm for the product
Unless you,
developer. If
like,
it says
just don't
this
count that
works, or
one
this
or something? I
vaccine
don't
works,
know.
or this cancer drug works, now the FDA is actually advertising it to the public. If this is the types of things that we should be looking at, what if we went back to the mandate? All FDA is responsible for is it safe? Prove your
1,
product
2,
is safe
3,
for human
4,
consumption or
5.
however it's being used, and that what's in the bottle is what it says it is, and let the market
6.
decide whether this thing works or not, whether it does what it says it does.
7, 'cause
I'm
there's
going to
one
go
in
to
the
the
back.
doctor that's having better results in cancer, and he may be using ivermectin and, fenbendazole or whatever it is. The FDA, does the FDA need to be involved in that process? We get, as consumers, to decide whether we think something's efficacious.
I almost
If we
wonder
went
if this-
back there,
I guess
now
it's a
vitamin
Vital
can make the
slash
same
that's in there. I
claims
don't
that
even
a
know if
drug
it's
is
worth it.
making, and you decide
This
whether
better-
it's worth
if
it or not. The
this takes
society
too much
starts to
longer,
decide,
I'm
or
just
the
gonna
doctors
skip
you're
it.
going to decide. It would totally change the way our system works right now, and I think it's a very
4,
interesting conversation.
I want real
4,
quick, just a citation,
7.
because I see a lot of people are contesting what I just said
3,
about
4,
sucralose,
4, 7,
and I am
3, 4.
correct.
I
You are
swear to
wrong.
God.
Some people are saying it's saccharin. Tim's story is BS. Here you go. I pulled it up. Sucralose, often marketed as Splenda, is an artificial sweetener that tastes similar to sugar but with 0 calories. Its discovery is famously attributed to the researcher misinterpreting test as taste. The story goes that during research on sucrose derivatives, scientist Shashikant Phadnis misheard the command to test a chlorinated sugar compound as taste it, leading to the accidental discovery of its sweetness. That is sucralose, not saccharin, sucralose. Splenda, a.k.a.
So to Dell's thread about changing the structure, the underpinnings of the mission that FDA has, you're accurate in referring to kind of the history and the growth of FDA. But as happens with all these agencies, once you establish a federal mandate, it tends to get grown. And that's what's happened, is this kind of mission creep that occurs in agency after agency. And I think there's a lot of merit to the idea of pulling FDA back. I think there's another thing too that's important to understand. People don't process. How does FDA get its power? Because for those of us that are constitutionalists, the Constitution does not allocate the regulation of medicine or medical products or medical practice to the federal government. Therefore, it vests to the states. So how does the FDA justify its position? It's all grounded on interstate commerce. Because the Constitution vests the right to regulate interstate commerce to the federal government, that is the crack that has allowed the FDA to slip in. And also USDA, which is why you have these situations like the Amish farmers, notably in Pennsylvania, that are producing raw milk or beef or whatever, and they can't transport it across state lines. That's because of the Interstate Commerce Clause, and that's what allows the feds to come in. I think we got to really look at this kind of transformation that has occurred in a gradualistic way across all of these agencies. The CDC should not be telling physicians, let alone states, what they should practice, how they should practice, what they should do. They don't have the right to do that. CDC is not even chartered. CDC is like
Yeah, I don't know.
It's
I
one
give
of
up.
these agencies that was
I'm out.
never authorized by Congress, and it could be eliminated basically.
It's like
with
I
a
counted all
in
those
by
twice.
Donald Trump, if he wanted to, just like USAID.
And I tried a variation of
where's the
numbers
red
and
line?
nothing
Yeah.
worked, so I don't know.
These artificial dyes are really bad for everybody. And parents don't realize that Red 40, they don't realize, what is that? It comes from a little bug they mash up. It's got like an aluminum compound in it or something. Or tartrazine, which Robert was talking about quite a bit. A coal tar derivative that turns things yellow. We want the government to ban these things, right? Or you know,
Well, I think there's two ways to go, right? Do we treat it like cigarettes? You have this whole the grass that generally recognized as safe. So these new chemicals come out. Now, vitamins fall under that too, which I wasn't really paying attention to recently. Like generally recognized as safe, these compounds that are in
gotta
vitamin
find-
C or whatever.
gotta
We
find
don't
clothes
have every
for
single vitamin C company
Cloud,
prove
right?
that it's safe. So
Clothes for Cloud.
You see a basis for generally recognized
It's
as
like
safe. But a brand
fundraiser.
new chemical chemical, like a dye, comes
Close
on the
for
market,
Cloud.
and the FDA is just looking the other way and saying, we're going to give you a grass, that's generally recognized as safe, so it's going into food, and now you have to have enough people poisoned by it. Someone's got to figure out funding, because now you're in a post-marketing space. Who's doing that post-marketing research? Who can fund it? And then you got to try and win a lawsuit against a Kellogg's or a giant company, and so that isn't working, right? I think so. Either we've got to put more energy into, you have to prove this thing is safe before we put it into our food, which means that's what we thought the FDA was doing. Or if you're not going to do that, then there should be a warning label. This product was never tested for human consumption, and there are studies that show that it's an endocrine disruptor and can cause cancer. Eat at your own risk.
I mean,
Do I have to? Oh my
I
god.
suppose there's the libertarian view of choose what you eat, right? I try to eat healthier. We have farm fresh eggs from the chickens. But most people can't afford to live that way. They go to the grocery store and they grab a box of processed grains, and they've got a whole bunch of crazy preservatives in it. That sickens society. And then my concern is a developmentally stunted, diseased population will vote for its own destruction because it's not. It's a gangrenous function of the body politic, essentially.
But it will vote because it's stuck on a television that is owned by the people making the poison that they're eating every day.
Well, just even outside of that, if you took 100 people and had them build a society, and then one day introduced a food substance that they were all consuming with a rate of 7% genetic degradation per generation, eventually they are dysfunctional, decrepit, unable to reproduce.
Sick.
Yeah.
Sick. There's this. I don't know if you've ever. You guys have probably heard the studies they've done on cats and the meat consumption, raw versus cooked and dairy. They had 3 generations of cats, and there's numerous studies that have followed this. They one family of cats were given only raw meats, one was given only cooked meats, and one was given only dairy products. The cooked meat family, within a few generations, started losing their hair, becoming sickly, eventually lost the ability to reproduce. The raw meats flourished and had way too many babies, and the dairy was
That was
somewhere in the
Vincent's
middle.
coughing.
So you look at something as simple as obligate carnivores like cats. Then apply that to the human population, where we have poisons in our food that don't immediately kill you, but slowly over time do. Cats losing their hair, coughing, gagging, and not reproducing is obvious, but what happens when the brain is damaged, even a small percentage over a long period of time? These individuals who continually eat these products thinking it's safe are going to get more and more damaged, meaning their ability to self-regulate will be harmed. And then those of us who are actually like, hey guys, let's exercise, eat right, eat healthy, and make America healthy again, are going to be combating people who are otherwise diseased from environmental toxins, voting against the interests of those that are trying to save them.
I think that you're pointing out one of the biggest issues we have. Not only are we sick, but we are reaching the point where no one remembers the time when we weren't sick. Right? We're about to lose the last.
OBRB. I gotta get a couple things done. And yeah, I don't jump back on this. I'm just gonna leave it paused, but I will stop streaming and just start a new one.